Hi, everyone. I'm Jim Christian, founder and CEO of Cornerstone, and welcome to Behind the Barricade. If you've been listening to the show, you know what we're after. We want to find the people in construction who actually are cracking the code on productivity, not in theory, on real projects with real stakes. Today's guest is someone I connected with recently through a mutual friend, and from the first conversation, I knew we had to get him on the podcast. Charles Stark is the president and CEO of Stark Engineering out of New York City. They do MEP and fire protection design primarily in retail and in corporate interiors, licensed in 48 states. And he's built his company from scratch right after COVID with a deal he made with his wife that if he could bring in $1,000 a month, he'd give it a shot. 5 years later, he's still going strong and growing. Here's what I loved about this conversation. Charles walks us through a project in Soho right now where the client said they want a stretch fabric ceiling across the entire space and nothing visible in it. No sprinklers, no fire alarms, no air diffusers, nothing. And he explained the creative solution his team came up with that I honestly hadn't heard before. It's clever. He also talks about the moment an email came in on a change order dispute, and he was mid-typing a defensive response, then stopped, picked up the phone, and completely changed the trajectory of that project relationship. And he raises a concern about the future of trades workforce. And I think every one of us should be thinking about this. Let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Charles Stark. Hi, I'm Jim Christian, founder and CEO of Cornerstone, and this is Behind the Barricade, a podcast that explores productivity in construction and looks for breakthroughs in real life situations. Today, I have a great guest that I recently met through a mutual friend, Charles Stark. Charles is the president and CEO of Stark Engineering based in New York. And just a few days ago, I was in New York and Charles and I got to meet in person and had a nice cup of coffee at the cafe there at Times Square. And it's great, Charles. Thank you so much for coming today, and look forward to our conversation. And maybe before we get started into productivity and all that's happening in what you're seeing through your projects and your lens, maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into the industry, and what led you to opening Stark Engineering.
All right. Well, thank you, Jim, for having me on the pod. I've been looking forward to speaking. I'll take you back a good two decades or so, just for a quick moment to share how it all started.
Yeah.
When I was about 10, 12 years old, my grandfather had his own structural engineering practice out in Long Island. It was a storefront in a small town, and he did residential stuff or small restaurant stuff all throughout the island. And I used to watch him work. At the time, I thought that I fell in love with the engineering work. He had his drafting tables, the sort of old school tilted real tall table.
I love those tables.
Probably 4,000 different pencils and erasers intentionally. I'm showing my age here, but he used to draft. These are real blueprints, right? Real blueprints. He never got on board with AutoCAD, although it did come to life while he started his business. And so I loved the idea of watching him take information in and translate that to engineering documents and then see something get built. I think with that said, as I'm now a little bit older and wiser, I realized that I really enjoyed watching him create relationships that sort of lasted his life. He had a knack for going deeper with his clients than other sort of business relationships did. And so I've tried to take that with me into Stark Engineering. I'll fast forward a bit. I've been employed at a few different companies. At one point, I sort of realized this is sort of right after COVID was real hot and heavy throughout the States. I realized it was about time. I knew I would do this. I'd take a stab at it. My wife and I we made an agreement where if I could bring in, I forget the number, but like $1,000 a month, which cannot sustain life in New York. I promise you that. Just to get things going. We'll see if this thing might work. And lo and behold, heck, we've probably grew tenfold in terms of people count and revenue in 3 years. Now we're in year number 5, and it's been fast and exciting. I'm loving the ride.
Awesome. And what's your specialty in the engineering? What areas do you focus in?
We do MEP and fire protection, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire alarm, fire standpipe, fire sprinkler systems design. We don't do the construction. We do the engineering design. That's our forte.
Yeah. And what areas or industries segments do you focus in? I know when we talked at Capital One, you mentioned the retailer. What's kind of your breakdown in the markets that you service?
Yeah, I'd say we had tested ourselves throughout many different sort of verticals of the AEC space. And I came to realize that we're just very good at retail and workplace work. That's sort of our
Mm,
jam. And so we decided to sort of just hone in on that area of expertise. I say at this time, probably about 65% of our revenue is sourced from retail work, and therein it's about 50-50 between luxury brand work and what I'll call the sort of higher volume, repeatable
right.
type work. Really all throughout the country, we're licensed in 48 states now. So we've got boots on the ground sort of up and down the East Coast, and we're quite present on job sites. Again, mostly in the retail space when it's outside of New York City. In New York, we primarily focus on the corporate interior stuff because, of course, we have a market for it here. That's about what we do. Yeah.
Amazing, amazing. Well, it's exciting to hear how your grandfather influenced you so much in choosing to come into this industry and his focus on relationships.
Mm.
We've only known each other a few months, but I don't think the apple fell far from the tree, if you know what I mean, because as we've gotten to know each other, every time we talk between us, it's all about the relationship that you and I have, and I can see that rippling through your organization. Yeah, that your grandfather would be proud of you, I'm sure. I'm sure.
Oh, thank you.
Just as we think about productivity in construction, part of the reason we started this podcast was we've seen it on the research we've been doing that productivity has been pretty flat for a couple of decades, despite technology improvements and things that we think would make us faster and more productive. So when do you see a productivity breakthrough? What's the lens that you look through when you're looking at a project that's working well or that you're into and seeing great productivity and great results? What resonates with you when we talk construction productivity?
That's a really good prompt. My brain naturally went to the word technology. I'm sure we'll talk about that, so I'll table that for a moment. Because
Yeah.
we're in a very important time and space at the moment as it relates to technology. But I'm going to take a step back and focus on the human side of things for a moment. I think we see a lot of good on job sites when the pre-design or design phase work tees the contractor up for success. Keep in mind about 95% or so of my earned value on a project comes from the design phase. Right. So I think I'll give you a slightly different lens than probably most of your guests do and sort of hone in there as opposed to the construction phase. In fact, I have a good project I think of at the moment. I'll talk about that one if I may.
Yeah.
We have a job currently in design. It's a UK-based retailer who's got this incredible online shopping presence and a bunch of brick and mortar throughout Europe, building their first bit of North American real estate here in the city. It's downtown in a district called Soho, which is known for its historic landmark properties. We're talking about building sort of a grade A, modern, sleek retail space in a historic property. Going into the project, we've done our due diligence. We've seen the sites. We have a good stronghold on existing MEP systems. And then we see the render. Everybody in the retail space has designed in some way, shape, or form to these stretch fabric ceilings. I must admit I was quite perplexed seeing that the entire ceiling is all stretch fabric. Oh, pardon me, we got a 4-inch gypsum band around the perimeter of a 6,000 square foot space, and the owner says, I don't want anything in that ceiling. So sprinklers, fire alarm devices, air terminals, security cameras, you name it. Boy, quite the challenge. So my point here is we see that, and the architecture team, who's been a really great partner on the project, the owner themselves as well, we sort of have this aha moment where we realize we need to slow down, pump the brakes, take a step back. What we thought we were getting ourselves into is drastically different from what we see here. Now, what's our sort of SWOT analysis? How do we step by step make sure we're making the right decisions at the right time to ultimately design something that is useful for bid purposes, gets through permit, and most importantly is constructible? We realized at that moment that the budget that was previously proposed was nowhere near close to what it takes to get this product built. We realized that the property being landmarked, actually quite literally until tomorrow, means it be exempt from energy code compliance. Tomorrow, New York City adopts a new energy code iteration, which means no longer is that exempt. And there's no way you're complying with code with all that LED matrix throughout the ceiling. And a lot of what we thought we might design is just not buildable, right? You can't put equipment that requires 4 access points above the ceiling that you can't access. So the team and the stakeholders really sort of gave us a space to present our thoughts. We pulled the design back a few steps, reevaluated, got the right expediting agent on board to help us navigate the permitting process. We pushed to get a CM on board to start doing a little bit more of a refined budget exercise. And we now sort of course corrected. We're about 2 weeks away from having drawings done. Contractors are aware of the scope of work. We're managing expectations. And now we're walking into a job with permits in hand, with the contractor lockstep with the design team, so we can actually see them build the space on time and in budget.
Wow.
Perhaps I'll come back in a few months to share if that does prove to be true. But my point is that could have been catastrophe, right? And
Yeah.
I think oftentimes folks aren't given the space to really express what we see could be problematic. Fortunately, we have that here, and now we've been able to sort of right that ship.
Pre-construction can make or break the project, can't it?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, good for you for opening up that lens for this to be exposed, because so often it can not be that way, that the blinders stay on, and it's not till we're further down the tunnel that we realize we have such a big problem, that where there's so much misalignment between what needs to be done, what the client wants, and what the budget expectations. That we focus on that a lot at Cornerstone when we're managing projects. Like, is everything aligned here? Is it going to be successful at the end of the day? So good for you to do that. I am curious, and maybe you can't share it because of it's so fresh and hasn't been kind of realized yet, but what did you do? Like, what was the strategy to get away from, or to manage the expectations of access points and those kinds of things? Like, how far out of the box did you have to go with your thinking?
Yeah, great question. Envision a space that's primarily rectangular shape, right? All the stretched fabric ceiling throughout, the no-fly zone of stuff within the ceiling. Then you've got your perimeter millwork fixturing. The products this brand offers are mostly apparel-based products. So you've got these fixtures with sort of a depth and a backing to it. It's all custom fabricated millwork. We ended up designing for the majority of the headers within those millwork fixtures to be accessible. So we now all of a sudden have actually quite a nice favorable space around the perimeter that we can use for devices that require access. We also made sure we understood exactly what our sprinkler spacing requirements are, so we can leverage sidewall sprinklers, extended coverage within the millworks sort of fascia, I'll say, beneath the ceiling, and the same applies to problem devices. So we essentially got everything that traditionally is ceiling mounted built into the millwork assemblies. The architect ended up engaging the millworker early so we can have them start shop drawings ahead of the construction process. So we have annotations and notes for sprinkler here, fire alarm here. When you fabricate with this grommet built into it, so fire alarm slips their cabling through it, and we mount our devices here. So really sort of engaging the right players earlier than usual and making millwork accessible. That's key to success.
Talk about coordinating. Talk about aligning your partners up early to be able to do that. And what a creative solution. That's amazing. I look forward to coming to New York and walking this project when it's all done with you, and seeing it in real life. That's awesome. Well done. But it does take communication, doesn't it? It does take teamwork to achieve that.
It certainly does. I've spoken to it a bit thus far, and I'll do a little bit more. I'm really in the space of my career development where I focus on relationships and how to build successful teams. That's been a big part of what I do. If I may quickly mention, I've done a good bit of research on this. There are some teams, be them in the AEC space or heck sports teams, that are just successful naturally, maybe without even the best talent. Right. And I think what I've thus far seen on that is it's about presenting a space where everyone's working in the same direction towards the same goal. And that message is abundantly clear, and where folks feel like they can say what they have to say. They can be vulnerable. They can put their neck on the line to suggest something that might be a silly idea. Right. Where we see that happening, to me, is when we see the most success in projects running in the right direction.
Amazing. So the flip side of that coin, when you see projects that don't have good productivity or get off the rails and timelines slip and budgets balloon, do you see any common threads? And I know you're so focused on the pre-construction that, as you said earlier, it's like 90% of your efforts going into that pre-construction and design, but you are through the whole cycle. At the end of the day, you're seeing it built and making sure it meets all the code and specifications that you've laid out. So when you see it not working, what do you see? Is there any common threads when you see productivity dipping and not being successful?
I'm going to jot down these two words. I see siloed communication, and I'll talk about that a bit. And I see an unsafe space, and I'll talk about that a little bit. I think so often in a world of fast-paced text exchange and emails and whatnot, sometimes we see folks omitted from communications when their presence is important. Or conversely, we see too much email correspondence that distracts our attention from the right thing. And now we're getting to a space where perhaps owner has to spend money on a change order, and we're trying to unthread how we got to that point. And the communication channels are either siloed or confusing or too abundant or not the right forum. We have a rule at my company, which is when it feels the slightest bit negative, you call. So if an email comes in that it feels like it might be accusatory or there's a change order issue that's up for discussion, you'll email for record, sure, but you pick up the phone and call first. And that's my segue to my next point is I talked a little bit about vulnerability and safety in a network and a team. So often, I'm probably particularly biased being in New York, which is quite the competitive market. So often there are these little micro cues of competition and of us not rowing in the same direction towards the same goal that creates a bit of dissonance amongst the team and makes people feel like they are unsafe. They must defend themselves in their company to so-and-so, to owner, to contractor, to make sure that they stay in good standing. And that could be as silly as the phrasing of an RFI, right? We do a lot of work with a company called Swinnerton, a big national company with a good New York City presence. And, I remember on a project with them in particular, they craft RFIs. It sounds so silly. It's a written text on a Procore notification, but the RFI is written in a way that makes you feel like you really want to chime in and help them, right? Not as if your work is being challenged and it might be grounds for a change order, and you need to be able to say, yes, you do have to do this, so they can charge a change order for it. That happens, right?
Yeah.
Or the email correspondence. There's a difference between the greeting of, hello, good to see you last week, let's talk about this and get some stuff figured out. Oftentimes it otherwise feels like it's aggressive correspondence. So there's these micro cues. It's, do you belong? Are you safe in this space or not? And when you're presented in a space where it's not safe, where you have to defend yourself, I don't think we've ever seen good success on a project through construction.
Yeah. What would you say the key is for keeping it safe for the project partners on a project? What do you think is any key thoughts on how to keep it safe?
I see the most value keeping it safe when who's perceived as the greatest stakeholder or leader, or might be the owner's rep or the owner themselves, when they are vulnerable with the team, when they share, hey, you guys are more talented and be in your areas of expertise. I'm relied upon you. Help me figure this out, right? Help me figure this out, not what went wrong here. Right. When leaders share vulnerability, I think it makes people feel like it's okay for them to, again, put themselves out there and try to help the project. Makes them want to help the project. Yeah.
I loved your comment about emails. We tend to have a philosophy here that email is not meant for conversation. You have the conversation and you document it in the email on whatever decisions that have been made, because so often my rule is like, if I have to respond more than once, then we need to be picking up the phone and having that conversation, because it just gets carried away when it's email. You were telling me when we were together in New York last week that you had a situation with a contractor, and because of listening to the podcast, you took a different action than maybe you might have, or that was kind of building that relationship. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that story?
Yeah, that's a great one. And the person I referenced was Jim McNally. I'd never met him, but I really enjoyed his interview on the pod. A lot of what he said resonated well with me. I had a situation where I was stepping in for a colleague, and a message comes through. I forget if it was an RFI or an email or whatnot. And right off the bat, I sort of took it as I'm being put in a place to have to defend my work and discredit the change order you're requesting, sort of in honor of my documents. I don't want to have to do that. That's uncomfortable, right? And I'm sort of mid-typing my response when I thought about Jim, and I said, hold on a minute. I pick up the phone and I called him, and almost immediately it felt like there was just weight off our shoulders, and the sort of posturing dropped, and it was, okay, well, I get why you're asking that question. That makes a lot of sense. And yeah, you know what? We couldn't have possibly seen that. It was behind a wall when we surveyed the space. Yeah, we're on the same page. We're in lockstep. Let's go ahead and get this figured out. And they got compensated, and I backed them on it. I told them, sure, they deserve compensation for that. I couldn't see that when we surveyed. It's not my documents. That's completely fair. And all of a sudden, our relationship went from potentially sour to, we're skyrocketing through this construction process.
Nice.
It's really cool.
Well, I'll be sure to let Jim know that you picked that up from him.
He did.
When you think about the future, what trends are you paying attention to, or what do you think as an industry we should be paying attention to?
I think this is probably where we get back to the subject of technology. We are in, I'm sure you know, we are in an interesting space at the moment with the advancement of, I'll sort of use the blanket term, it's AI tools or large
Yeah.
language model tools or design automation platforms. So those exist. They are here. I hate them, but they are here. They are starting to sort of pervade the way that we design the right way. But I'm aware that they're going to get better year by year, and it become necessary for us to adopt that technology, because if we don't, the competition will, and all of a sudden their work is more cost effective and all. So I'm very much on board with it. I'm certainly a tech advocate in our space. I'm also a bit of a cynicist in the sense of, again, the closer we get to technology, the farther we get from the human connection that makes our projects successful. I think we tend to focus on buying back slices of our time, as I had mentioned before, which is great, and the technology can do that for sure. But the moment we sort of lose touch of the fact that this is a people business, then I think we start to see some failures.
In an AI mastermind the last year, and it really has been hitting me the last, I don't know, couple of months, how AI can help us in certain ways, but it cannot replace what happens on a job site or cannot replace the human connection in the project. It can speed up a few things with how communication gets documented and all this kind of thing, and helping in design. I know there's some interesting things happening in the design area, but at the end of the day, it's people on a project, whether that's in their office on doing the design or physically on the space building it, that AI will not be able to do that. We might get some robots that will help with certain elements of construction along the way. I know I saw one the other day where it was laying floor tile, but it still needs to be managed. It still needs to have a human element on it. Do you feel there is one particular issue that we're facing in construction? You know, we've talked about technology, but do you feel there's any one particular industry that we really need to be paying attention to? Is there one burning issue that you kind of say, we need to fix this, or we need to be paying attention to this as an industry?
I do, and you know, it's funny. I think you probably have a bit more visibility to it than I, but I am aware that we have a pretty major issue and shortage amongst trade professionals. I'll share with you. I'm a guy who's got the college degree, and I learned a lot of the design material from a textbook, right? And I say this all the time. I have learned more from speaking to trade professionals directly than I have from any textbook or any classroom setting. I think the less folks we get who are career professionals, be it pipe fitters or electricians or carpenters, the more trouble that sort of savvy construction sees in good time. I think you're right in that humanoid robot type deals will eventually start to do some elements of the construction process, maybe the predictable, repeatable things like laying out tile, for example. But we rely upon the folks who really have their hands on the materials, who know how to build it, to do great things. And I worry, I've got a 3-year-old kid at home, and I worry, you know, by the time she's 18, 20 years old, what will be left of folks who pursued trades? I'm not so sure it'll be the way it once was. We're also in an economy where it feels like the rich become ultra rich, and those without means sort of hang out somewhere below. And that middle class environment that suited the trades at one point in time doesn't really exist the way it used to. It is quite worrisome that it is. If you don't mind me asking, are you seeing similarities with your more intimate knowledge of the construction space?
Absolutely. I think it's probably the biggest concern we have, right? That how do we get young people engaged in the trades? Again, with AI, so many of those tech jobs, despite what we might read sometimes, they're going to change, and maybe some are going to be eliminated. But at the end of the day, it's people, men and women, going to build things, repair things, maintain things that will always be there, no matter what. So it's how do we attract them? How do we pay them in a way that gives them a great lifestyle and gives them the ability to be able to live a good life? So I think it's a challenge, but I think it's one that we're going to have to solve as an industry over time. I think we need to be thinking about it. That's for sure. Well, Charles, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy day to chat with me. It's been a great pleasure. I know the people that are going to listen to this We'll get some gems out of it and really grateful for that. If someone wanted to connect with you directly, what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Yeah, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. Charles Stark with the company Stark Engineering. Also email charles.stark@stark-engineering.com. I've always got my inbox open. So please, I'd love to chat. And thank you, Jim. I appreciate your time as well.
Yeah, well, thank you. So thanks everyone for listening today. If you got some content out of this podcast, please rate the podcast on the platform you're listening to it or on LinkedIn. This podcast, Behind the Barricades, brought to you by Cornerstone. And we're really dedicated to creating a better journey for our clients, our staff, our project partners, and ultimately the world. So we feel that this podcast is living into that vision. So thanks for listening. And thanks again, Charles. And we'll catch you all on the next time we have a podcast. I really enjoyed that conversation with Charles and hope you walked away with as many learnings as I did. I want to make sure a few things land with you from this one that landed with me. First, the Soho project. Here's a team that looked at the renderings, realizing what they thought they were designing was drastically different from the reality. And instead of pushing forward and hoping for the best, they pumped the brakes. They pulled the design back, got the right people in the room early, brought on an expediting agent and a CM before construction even started, and corrected the course. Charles said it best, that could have been catastrophic, but because the team created space to speak up about what they were actually seeing, it wasn't. That's a lesson for every single one of us. Pre-construction can make or break a project, as we all know, and we have to give our teams the room to say what needs to be said. Second, I loved his rule about communication. When it feels like slightly a bit negative, you call. You don't email back and forth. You pick up the phone. And the story told about stopping mid-response on a change order dispute, calling instead, and watching the relationship completely turn around, that's not theory. That's real life. That's a real moment on a real project, and that changed the outcome. The third, his point about psychological safety on a project team. The micro cues that we get from an RFI and how it's worded, how an email opens, whether people feel like they need to defend themselves or whether they feel safe enough to actually help. That's the kind of thing that separates teams that succeed from teams that fight their way through a project, impacting productivity negatively. If any of that resonates with you, I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening. A quick review goes a long way in helping other people in our industry discover these conversations. And the more people we can bring into this, the better all of our projects will get. This is Behind the Barricade, brought to you by Cornerstone, where we're dedicated to creating a better journey for our clients, our staff, our project partners, and ultimately the world. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.